Okay, I think we can kick off. Hello everyone, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us for this webinar today. My name is Tallulah Lutkin and I am Utilities Editor at GWI. So yes, thank you so much for joining us. So the purpose of this webinar is to dig deeper into the research that myself and my colleagues conducted at GWI this year into utility capital investment and resilience. And that formed the basis of a groundbreaking white paper that came out in May. So if you haven't already, I'm guessing if you're here, you've downloaded and read the white paper, but if you haven't, please go to GWI White Papers to find that and check it out, because it's really some new research that we put out. So the topic of this webinar is about rethinking resilience, more specifically how utilities must and are already rethinking how they plan their infrastructure, how they invest in their infrastructure, in the face of new climate extremes. So we'll be hearing from two leaders, two major US utilities on this, as well as from our partner Xylem after a brief introduction from me about some of the findings of the white paper. So a little bit of background is what kicked off this research was two things really that we were seeing empirically, but we wanted to get hard data on. First was, might seem obvious, but the apparent increase in extreme weather events related to water. So be that droughts on the not enough water side or floods on the too much water side. And the second was the apparent increase in capital spending by many water utilities around the world. So we thought there might be a correlation between these two things. So what we're really looking at is research in both of those and how they might correlate. So the data on the first point is pretty clear. This chart was presented at the Global Water Summit. You may have seen it before. It's based on new data from NASA, and it shows very clearly the correlation between rising global temperatures that you can see in those sort of orange and red scary bars, and the incidence of more intense water-related events. So that's both droughts and floods. And what this means essentially is that utilities are facing a fat tail risk distribution problem. So it's statistics, but basically it means a greater likelihood of extreme outcomes. And what does that mean for utilities? In practice, it means that they need to increase the resilience of their systems to be able to confront these events. So when you look at it, simply, there are pretty much two ways of doing this. Option one, you build out your infrastructure capacity enough so that you can match what you think is going to be the new normal of extremes to the sort of same level of security that utilities have today to confront major weather events. Now, this is sort of the brute force option maybe, and the issue with that is that what we have estimated is that this would mean multiplying current utility infrastructure capacity by at least 5 and would require something around $16.5 trillion in capital investment worldwide by 2040. And if that seems like a big number, that's because it is, and we think it's probably not possible to achieve that given current trends, and even if we were all to pull together, that would be a huge amount of money. And it might even not even be enough, right? Because we don't even know if these extremes, how extreme they're going to get. And so the other option, which is might somewhat say it's the only option, is to invest differently and to invest smarter. Now, of course, there's still going to be a need for a significant amount of investment regardless, but we estimate that if utilities rethink the way that they invest, how they plan, how they procure, think about smart and digital systems, about dual purpose infrastructure, nature-based solutions, new sources of funding, all of these things combined, they might be able to reduce annual capex needed by about half. And we also think those systems would actually be more resilient in the long run than if the utilities would just build that capacity, because they would be more adaptive and just more smart, whether that's on the digital side or in the broader sense. So as I said, it will still require significant investment. And our research on what utilities are doing already shows three things. First, that utilities are already investing significantly in resilience. And we estimate that over 40% of utility capex spending is already for resilience. And this was looking at a broad range of utility capex plans from around the world. Secondly, that proportion is growing. not fast enough maybe, but we do estimate that it's going to go from sort of the low 40s now to over 46% in 2030 in the next 5 years. And thirdly, utility spending on resilience is growing faster than total capex. So utilities are investing more in resilience and more as a proportion of their total capex. And these numbers really show that resilience is a massive priority for utilities. And from conversations I've had with utilities, I think it would say that it is their biggest priority because it covers a wide range of sins, but also because climate change is just on everybody's mind. So before I hand over to our excellent speakers, because I'm sure you want to hear from them and not from me, I just wanted to share 2 more slides now that present some insights from our paper, specifically on the planning and financial aspects of utility investment, because this is kind of what this webinar is also focusing on. So first on planning, through our research, something that we did find as we were collecting these capital plans and as we were sort of trying to look into how utilities were investing in the long term, we found that there are quite very few utilities around the world actually have the regulatory and the planning mechanisms in place that enable them to formulate long, multi-year comprehensive plans. A lot of them may have maybe not much control of their capex plans. It might come from a national level, or they sort of have an annual year-on-year capital budget, which means that they can't necessarily project into the long term. But what we've also seen is that long-term plans are the best way for utilities to invest effectively for resilience. Now we've got some great examples from around the world in the white paper. If you want to go deeper on this, we have Austin, Texas, who formulated a sort of 100-year strategy. That's not exactly a 100-year capex plan, but it does have sort of multi-year, multi-decade capex in there, and kind of a long forward-looking strategy for them to achieve to secure their water supply. And that includes how they were going to engage stakeholders and how they're going to increase tariffs. And this question of tariff increase is really something that you see where utilities see the benefit of long-term planning, because if they can look ahead, then they can also plan their tariff increases ahead as well. And that gives more visibility to all stakeholders, to governments, politicians, who we all know hate tariff increases. And also have an example in Sydney, Australia. We will be having a second webinar in 2 weeks, and we'll have a speaker from Australia there who can speak a little bit more to this. But again, sort of regulatory the way that regulations work in Australia have enabled utilities to have long-term plans there, and that's something that's really beneficial in terms of resilience. And secondly, on the financial side, so as you saw through my first slides, a lot of investment is needed for utilities to secure resilience, and current spending patterns are insufficient. But the cost of not investing could be higher in the long run, as the cost of adapting to climate change is only going to increase with time. So utilities must, and already are, looking at 2 things. First of all, optimizing their investments by, for example, rethinking business models. Now, this is a really tricky one. We all know this dilemma about water scarce areas. How do you increase your revenue to invest in drought resilience while at the same time encouraging people to use less of the water that you are selling? And for stormwater also, the financial model is a little bit unclear, especially when you have assets that are very critical but might not be used as often. So some creative thinking is needed on that side. And thinking could come in at the procurement level as well, and also on innovations. And again, our second webinar in 2 weeks will really go into looking at the innovation gap. And secondly, on the finance side, things like new funding mechanism is something that utilities are looking to explore. Tariffs obviously really important, and tariff reform can play a role, but we also know tariffs alone won't be enough. So things like looking at bonds, loans, and also, of course, getting other stakeholders involved to contribute to the issue. So is that the insurance industry? Is that developers? So as you can see, a broad range of possibilities and thinking on this, but where utilities really need to, they need help both from their whole stakeholders, and they need to do some new thinking, and they already are. And that's why we're here. And so that's what we're going to hear now from 2 really excellent speakers on this topic. So that's it from me. I'm going to now hand over to our first speaker, so Rohit Aggarwala from New York City. And just to remind you, if you do have any questions on my presentation or any of the other presentations to follow, you can use the chat to ask your questions, and there will be time at the end to answer those questions. So thanks so much, and I will hand over to Rit now.
All right, thank you, Tallulah, and good morning and good afternoon to everybody. As Tallulah mentioned, I'm the Commissioner of Environmental Protection in New York City and lead New York City DEP, and I also have the role of being Chief Climate Officer for New York City. So one of the things that Mayor Adams did when he appointed me was very much recognize the interconnection between the water infrastructure and overall climate policy. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. DEP is an integrated water utility. We provide drinking water, we transport and treat the wastewater. We also have a couple of functions that are beyond the scope of a normal utility. On the bottom right, for 40 years now, we've also regulated air, noise, and hazmat in New York City, so a non-water function. And then something we just took on 2 years ago is actually responsibility for New York City's coastal defenses. And I'll come back to that, but as a result, we have a really broad portfolio and deal with all sorts of climate impacts. Next. As a coastal city, New York City has a lot of climate exposure, and the most important and obvious one in some ways is flooding. New York City has 520 miles of coastline. We are a city of islands. So basically all New Yorkers live pretty close to water. We, 13 years ago, of course, very famously suffered Hurricane Sandy, which had catastrophic flooding impacts both in lower Manhattan and in several parts of the city and killed more than 40 New Yorkers. 3 or 4 years ago, we suffered from Hurricane Ida, which was a massive rainstorm that had a peak flow, actually at the 15-minute level, of 6 inches per hour at the absolute peak, but 7 inches of rain total over the 6-hour storm window, and that killed 13 people. What's generally unappreciated when it comes to climate change and impacts on health is that actually heat is the bigger killer. And we estimate that over the last decade, 500 New Yorkers have died as a result of elevated summertime temperatures during heat waves. And then just last year, for the first time in more than 20 years, in fact, closer to 25, New York City had its first drought. And that is, of course, in keeping with all the climate projections that while the northeastern United States is actually going to get wetter on average due to climate change, unlike parts of the Western US, much of Europe, etc., it is completely consistent with all of the climate models that spikes, that even as we are getting wetter on average, we will have some extreme droughts, and we did for the first time last year. Next, please. Speaking specifically of our water infrastructure, as Tallulah suggested, first of all, our biggest challenge and probably the largest dollar amount, and certainly the one that is top of mind, I think, to most New Yorkers, is how we deal with our stormwater infrastructure. If we look back, most of New York City's infrastructure was built to handle a 5-year design storm of 1.5 inches per hour, which was what it was for most of the 20th century. Happily, Manhattan and parts of the Bronx were designed with a higher standard at 1.75. Over the last 20 years, we had upgraded that to 1.75 or 1.8 inches per hour. But now as we look ahead, and we have for more than a decade in New York had a New York panel on climate change, which is a collection of academics that give us a projection that's updated every 3 years about what the climate models are saying New York City will face over the next century in terms of climate change. We are now beginning to embrace a forward-looking 5-year design storm at 2.1 inches per hour. And I'll come back to the first way that we are implementing that. We also in New York have an unfiltered surface water drinking supply. So 90% of our average water consumption comes from reservoirs west of the Catskill or west of the Hudson River to the northwest of New York City. We're one of a handful of cities that does not have to filter its water. But one of the things as we look ahead is that these increased bursts of much more intense rainfall is causing runoff that over time could imperil our filtration avoidance determination. And that is something that is going to require us to think very differently. Over the next couple of years in 2027, our current filtration avoidance determination comes to an end. So we will be, over the next year and a half, renegotiating the next 10-year FAD. And while there is nothing thus far to suggest that the FAD would be removed, if these trends continue, we are worried that there might be an event or series of events that could lead to the loss of our FAD and therefore require us to build what could be a $20 billion filtration plant. It would by far be the largest, certainly in North America. And so we are working with our regulators and our local partners to begin to think very differently about the kinds of watershed protections that we would need to deal with this very different set of weather patterns and pollution risks. The other thing that has happened over the last decade or so, New York City has done a really good job of implementing a maintenance program that has dramatically reduced our our dry weather sewer backups. If you go back, and this chart doesn't fully do it justice, because if you go back a decade or 15 years, we had a lot more dry weather backups. And that was actually something the EPA paid attention to. We've brought those way down, but as the wet weather has gotten more intense, what we've now found is that the majority of sewer backups in New York City are now wet weather driven, not dry weather driven, which they were before. And of course, a dry weather backup is probably maintenance related. It's either something has gone wrong or there's a clog, whereas the wet weather backups are generally because the sewer is simply overtaxed and more water is trying to get in than can fit, and it is backing up in different ways because of the physics. And so these are three ways that climate change is directly going to impact our water utility and our infrastructure and how we have to plan for it. Next slide. Among the things, and Tallulah pointed this out, is the most obvious thing that climate change is going to force us to do is dramatically increase our capital investments. We have now done stormwater planning over the last 3 years. We embraced the idea that we had to plan aggressively for stormwater resilience. We built a digital twin. That may be overstating it. It's a really good dynamic model. I like to call it a digital twin of our sewer system, which we had never had before, and that's allowing us to do truly integrated planning. We've actually begun to think about what it will take to achieve stormwater resilience in New York City, and the obvious answer is it's going to be a lot more capital investment. But that stormwater investment is only one of the things that we are having to do. We are doing coastal resilience. I'll come back to that. We are enhancing our treatment plants because at some point we are probably going to have to expand their wet weather capacity. And of course, we have some of our basic things like the maintenance of the water supply system. And so we only have the 2025 number. We now have a $33 billion 10-year capital plan. And that actually does not reflect an increase to address the needs for stormwater resilience. What all of that means is that, in fact, a new premium is being placed on the efficiency of our business processes. Our engineering and design, which is really a business process, but one of my biggest concerns when I arrived 3.5 years ago into this job was realizing that our procurement itself was a key constraint. And what's shown in this graph is that in 2021 and 2022, we actually had a much higher capital budget than we were actually able to spend. And so getting us to a point where we could spend all the money we had required changes in our business processes that we had not been able to affect. And so we've done a much better job. And actually, I think the 2025 number is partial. We'll do a little bit better than that suggests, since we just finished our fiscal year a couple of weeks ago. But it has been really interesting to think about the fact that while the obvious needs are on the capital side, the business processes are actually just as important to feed all of that and sustain it. Similarly, because this is going to require an increase in water bills, one of the things we've made a very big push on over the last couple of years is collections, because as all utilities did coming out of the pandemic, we had really high rates of accounts receivable, and it was clearly going to be a problem to go to our ratepayers who are paying their bills and ask them for sizable rate hikes if we weren't going after the people who were not paying their bills. And while some of those people who were not paying their bills were hardship cases, frankly, as we looked into it, we found a lot of people who had built swimming pools and just decided not to pay their water bills. So there were a lot of completely unsympathetic cases that we went after. Actually had the fun experience of putting a shutoff notice on a very fancy skyscraper on 3rd Avenue in Midtown. They paid later that day, I will point out. So going after collections is not just about hardship cases. There's a lot of money to be had, and that's something that we thought was really important to do, and is in fact part of an overall resilience agenda. Next slide, please. The headlines, though, in terms of what we are doing, as I mentioned, we built this new hydraulic model. We embarked on what is really a 5-year planning effort to chart out what New York City will need to do to upgrade its stormwater infrastructure. Frankly, making many of my engineers highly uncomfortable. We had to issue a partial report that we did last year to show the work we had done, because frankly, the general public does not accept if you say, well, we're doing a 5-year planning effort and we'll tell you what we've learned 5 years from now. So we have to give some updates, even if some of the answers are partial. One of the things we did, which is shown in the middle graphic, is divided the city up into a couple hundred little zones based on the hydraulics, identified those areas that fall significantly short of a target of that future forward-looking 2.1-inch 5-year storm. And then on the right-hand side, thinking about a mix, and this was another change we had to make. We had to integrate our green infrastructure planning team and our gray infrastructure planning team. That previously decisions had been made, we're going to solve this problem with green infrastructure or gray infrastructure, and then the planning would commence. We actually had to integrate them. So we're looking at each of these locations and trying to figure out what is the mix of gray or green that we should do. And our back of the envelope number is $30 billion. I will point out, some of you may know, it's Thursday, July 17th, just on Monday, earlier this week, we had what was, at least at the weather station in Central Park, the second most intense rainfall in New York City's history. Happily, it was very short. And in fact, the sewer system, due to a lot of maintenance work we've been doing over the last year, performed extraordinarily well. But there were a number of subway stations that were flooded. And in fact, protecting those subway stations is not included in our $30 billion number, because what we have prioritized thus far is actually protecting lives and property. And so this is about protecting basements from being inundated and focused really on the residential parts of the city and not some of the places that were experienced the most flooding last Monday. Next slide. Another thing, as I said, we have taken on this new responsibility of coastal resilience, and a challenge that presents for us. I think there's a really strong argument, and we're already seeing the synergies of having stormwater management and coastal resilience in the same organization. But under the New York state law that establishes our structure, coastal resilience is not an eligible use of our water funds. And as a result, we are beginning to work towards identifying new sources of revenue to fund coastal resilience. We think a coastal resilience strategy for New York City is probably a $50 billion 25-year effort. It will also require roughly $300 million in annual maintenance costs. As Tallulah mentioned, the costs of inaction are much greater than the costs of action. We think that roughly $50 billion investment could avoid, on what's on the bottom left-hand side, an expected loss. This is expected, not potential, loss of $222 billion by the end of the century. And of course, we've had to come up with a number of different thoughts on where that revenue might be, what a governance structure might look like, and how we encourage the insurance industry to get involved. And I'm not sure, this may be my last slide. Is there another one, Tallulah? That's it, I think. Yes. And so I will wrap up there. There's a whole host of things that range from procurement and collections through stormwater planning, through taking on new tasks like coastal resilience, that are how New York City is going to be impacted and going to have to respond to climate change. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rohit, for that. Yeah, that was your last slide. I'm going to hand over now to Kishia Powell from WSSC Water, who's going to talk to you about her perspective from her utility. So over to you, Kishia.
Thank you, Tallulah, and thank you for having me as part of this discussion today. I was head nodding with everything that Rit said, because it sounds like many of the challenges that we're dealing with. But if we go to the next slide, WSSC Water handles water and wastewater. We do not handle stormwater. Yet many of our systems are impacted by the changing climate, and certainly the flash floods that we have seen just this week and last week. In fact, there have been major downpours, flash flooding, tremendous thunder, lightning every day this week except for Tuesday. And we were prepped for the storms, but on Tuesday, when it did not rain, the plant shut down. And it's just because of aged infrastructure. And it just goes to show that the repeated power losses that we have had at our Potomac facility is really causing a lot of stress on the system. And so whether it be a storm event or just the stress on the infrastructure, we're really thinking about how to, we're really rethinking resilience and thinking about what is needed and necessary to protect critical infrastructure so that we can continue to serve. Um, on this at a glance slide, I wanted to drive home the point that WSSC Water is really marked by our track record for no drinking water quality violations in 107 years. We do very well in terms of water resource recovery as well, have a number of peak performance awards, but we still have significant challenges. And the pressure to maintain our compliance track record and protect public health, I think is that much higher because of the track record that we have. But as we have communicated to our stakeholders, a lot goes into maintaining that track record and protecting public health. And at the top of the list is making sure that we have systems that are reliable and resilient. I wanted to point out just the sheer magnitude of our service area. We have 1,000 square miles split between two counties in Maryland, outside of the District of Columbia, which is that cutout that you see on the lower left. We serve 1.9 million customers. We're the eighth largest utility, combined utility in the US, and we are the largest of any type of utility, water, uh, uh, power, or gas in the state of Maryland. And we have 9 billion in assets that we maintain. If you remember this map, we'll go to the next slide here. Our service area is on the left, and again, we're serving Montgomery County and Prince George's County. Um, We have two water treatment plants, which are the light blue circles there, one on the Potomac River, the Potomac water treatment facility, and the Patuxent water treatment facility. Patuxent is the oldest, and it serves a portion of our service area. Potomac is the largest, and it serves 70% of our service area. And most notably, it serves Prince George's, a good deal of Prince George's County, either mixed flows with the Potomac, with the Patuxent plant, or by itself. And if that plant goes down, which it did on Tuesday evening, um, we really have no way to supply water to the southern half of Prince George's County. So if we're not able to get power restored to the plant, which has been a challenge of late, then we would be looking at having a significant number of our customer base in Prince George's County without water. And if you go to the slide in the middle, or the graph in the middle, this is a map by median household income. We've paid a lot of attention to balancing affordability with infrastructure investments, and we're really prioritizing solutions and infrastructure investments that that address the needs of communities that have been historically underserved. We have seen, as we see in the map to the right, the impacts of growing delinquencies, which are largely in those areas. It's directly correlated with those areas with lower median household income in both counties. What's also correlated with those areas are the signs of infrastructure issues. When we map sanitary sewer overflows that we have continued to have, that we've met, have had significant reductions in the number and the volume of SSOs, it's still very tightly correlated with those areas. The same with basement backups, very tightly correlated with those areas, and the same with water main breaks. So we see um, uh, infrastructure issues really surfacing in those communities where there has been historic underinvestment in the infrastructure. It's also where we see the greatest system vulnerabilities, not being able to serve portions of our service area with with our most financially constrained and vulnerable customers. Next slide. So just to take a follow the white paper, which was exceptional, I agree, Tallulah. I wanted to share what resilience in practice looks like for WSSC water as we focus on addressing climate and system risks. There is certainly impacts of drought and extreme weather events that are posing significant threats to our ability to supply safe drinking water. And it's also amplifying existing operational challenges that we have due to a lack of investment, largely in our treatment facilities. Back in 2010, many may recall there was a major water main break along River Road in Montgomery County, which created a river down River Road, and from that point, the capital improvement plan went whole hog in the linear infrastructure direction. A lot of focus on water main replacement, as well as large diameter water main inspections and installing the largest acoustic fiber optic monitoring network in the country. But that was at the expense of investing in our treatment facilities and other critical infrastructure that is necessary to serve. We've got to get water to the pipes, after all. And so we've been focused on resilience to droughts, resilience to extreme weather events and temperature changes, and then ongoing operational resilience. As far as resilience to droughts are concerned, we've been working with other utilities that are in the region, as well as the federal government under U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and a regional entity called the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments on a water supply program study. The reliance on the Potomac River by multiple utilities has created pressures on that river system. When we see periods of drought, which we have seen even with these rain events just prior to this, a month or so ago, we lifted a drought watch. And we have been in and out of drought watch for the last 2 to 3 years. We do have some cooperative agreements for the use of upstream storage. We have a reservoir that is controlled by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is the Jennings Randolph Reservoir, and then a reservoir that WSSC Water and two other partner utilities uh, uh, funded and maintain, and that's the Little Seneca Reservoir. We also focus on water conservation measures, including an education campaign. And as we move towards smart metering, we're still reading meters manually for the most part. 90% of our system is manually read meters. We're looking at technology that will allow us to um, uh, employ conservation methods and have more control and data about the system that we're managing, as well as other leak detection methods. When it comes to extreme weather events, we've had a number of issues with our water mains this past year, especially at the top of the year. In a 5-year period, we had more than 200 water main breaks. And this year we had more water main breaks than we have had in the recent past, and I think that's a growing trend for many utilities. But based on where it's happening, it's impacting the same communities over and over again. And so we have to again balance investment with the water main replacement and reconstruction program, with now ramping up efforts to invest in our treatment facilities. Um, to maintain water quality, as well as to address electrical and control issues, as we saw earlier this week. We've looked at a microgrid and are in discussions around that and other technologies to have greater reliance on the resources that we can recover. We've also looked at investing in additional solar arrays, including floating solar, and we also have a wholesale power agreement in place. Um, in terms of operational resilience, we're very much focused on source water protection. Um, Again, addressing our sewer system. We've seen declines in sanitary sewer overflows and basement backups, but we're striving to eliminate and striving for zero SSOs and basement backups, and I'll touch on that in a moment. And there are some other measures there as well in terms of ongoing operational resilience, including ensuring that we have continuity planning for supply chain issues that we continue to see, and cybersecurity and resilience, as well as emergency preparedness planning. Next. So I was asked to focus on financial and planning for this discussion, but I did lay out for the other two areas that are presented in the white paper, these focus areas around rethinking resilience and how we're transforming as a utility in terms of resilience planning and implementation. A number of things as far as institutional means. We established a new Department of Operational Reliability and Resilience. We've been very much focused on serving as an anchor institution and working with other collaborators in our region on a number of things, including master planning and resilience planning. WSSC Water in probably 2017, 2018 got away from planning facilities plans, master plans, and moved to an asset management based approach. I think that happened over a few years, um, and that did not it really narrowly focused the planning efforts for the CIP on an asset by asset basis instead of really having a system and big picture approach, long term view of what is necessary. And that really limited the thinking around resilience and and ensuring that there is long term resilience and reliability. Um, we have now just kicked off our master planning and facilities planning efforts in the last couple of weeks and are moving to long-term master plan in collaboration with other stakeholders as well as the 10-year facilities plans for each of our facilities. Um, where infrastructural is concerned, let's skip there. Again, focused on water supply for the future, redundancy, and a focus on energy supply. For financial, I'll call out our focus on procurement improvement as well. We found in my first year here in 2023 that procurement, and I like to distinguish between big P, the department, and little p, the process. So procurement, little p, was a significant barrier to us being able to move the capital program forward. We found that while we were communicating a certain budget around our spending for capex, we were really only financing 70%, and we're not achieving 70% of the CIP. And in prior years, have achieved as little as 7% of the CIP in certain portions of it. And it's really been because of those barriers in the process and really not having a strong procurement strategy that is aligned for CIP delivery in any fiscal year. We've also went through a process with our board of updating our rate setting policies to prioritize revenue stability. Um, Affordability was at the top of the list, and we still recognize that that is a challenge. But what we saw from the pandemic is that it's also important with a 700 million a year or thereabouts capital improvement program and all of the operational issues that we have to address, that we can't do it if our revenues are significantly impacted. So we increased our fixed fees and made some adjustments to our planning process for the CIP and our budget, which has been able to yield the highest rate increase for this year over the past 25 years. And then where planning is concerned, again, focused on establishing long-term vision for the utility. And that's where the focus on zero SSOs and zero basement backups comes from. Just modeled after our colleague Kevin Schaefer in Milwaukee. He tells a story about how he came up with a long-term vision for the utility where they focused on taking big swings and really committing to ensuring that we would have outcomes that were focused on making significant improvements in operations as well as significant outcomes for the community. And we are taking a page out of that book and modeling the same. And this is a vision that we're working to craft right now, have presented it to our commissioners, and they're very much on board. It also helps stakeholders to understand where we're going, but it's also a tool that is helping us to plan better. We know what we're aiming for. It also helps us communicate better to our stakeholders what it takes to get there. If we all agree that those are outcomes that we want to see for the community, then this is what it costs. And part of that vision is making sure that we have transformational and sustainable change within the utility in several key areas, including infrastructure and including our resilience and reliability posture. And again, that's directly tied to our financial planning and what we're able to achieve. We re-baselined the CIP in 2024 to again increase investments in our production facilities. And in the re-baselining, we were actually able to cut 95 million, which was important to be able to communicate coming into this difficult fiscal climate this year, and still reallocate to make sure that we're funding what we can actually deliver until we can ramp up. Next slide, which I think is my last. So this is what our capex spending looks like until we have those facilities plans, the master plans. We don't yet have full numbers on the funding gap and what is completely needed for resilient spending. But right now, as it stands, our CIP is 4.9 billion over 6 years. And that's the breakout for fiscal year 2026, which we just entered. We have to move 716 million, which is a significant lift. And we're very much focused on, we have a project stat process where we go through all 320 plus projects in our portfolio on a monthly basis to make sure that we are staying on track, getting on track, staying on track, and making sure that the planning is aligned with what we need to get out on the street to achieve this. And then I've noted some funding needs identified specifically for resilience projects in this next 10 years, and that's related to the water supply program and study that U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has executed. We estimate that our share of that would be plus or minus 800 million. We have a large diameter main at the Potomac plant for redundancy, which is over 118 million. And then we have another main that would help provide redundancy and resilience to serve that lower half of Prince George's County, which is over 55 million. And with that, that completes my slides, Tallulah.
That's great. Thanks so much, Kishia. Really appreciate that, and I appreciate how both presentations kind of, I guess, spoke to each other as well on similar issues. So I'm going to hand over to our last speaker, Austin Alexander from Xylem. We are running a little bit over time, but that's fine because we've had excellent presentation, so I think nobody's complaining. And I just want to remind everyone to pop their questions in the chat so that if we do have some questions, we can get to them sooner rather than later, as soon as Austin has concluded. So over to you, Austin.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Tallulah. It's really an honor to be on this panel with two significant leaders in the sector. So it really means a lot. So thank you for the opportunity. And if I were attending this webinar, I would certainly want a chance to ask questions of my two predecessors. So I will keep my comments as brief as possible so we can move on to the fun stuff. My role at Xylem, we're a water technology company, so we're providing the smart meters, treatment, pumping equipment that is working behind the scenes at utilities, but also at other water users, such as industrial companies and commercial buildings. And so my comments are in the context of what's technology's role in this, but I'll also provide a few comments from what we've seen in other work and work with utilities around the world, but with a little bit of a US focus. My role as of about a month ago is I lead artificial intelligence for Xylem, but most recently led sustainability. So I'll try to blend some of those perspectives together. But right now at Xylem, how we kind of think about the challenges and drivers on resiliency, but really, the sector as a whole it's the water scarcity. We don't have enough in many areas of the world. its quality. The quality challenges continue to grow, both in new contaminants that we're looking at, but also water resource availability. It's an affordability challenge. 2 million Americans lack basic water and sanitation services, and 1 in 7 households struggle to afford their water bills. And then, many of our water systems were built for the 20th century and built for predictable water flows. And what we're seeing, and I think was really telling from the two presenters before me, is they both had examples from the last 7 days of challenging environments and how they have evolved, and that's in the last week. And so we think about just the extremes that we're starting to see. And it's not just climate variability, it is really a structural shift we're seeing in the water cycle, in which utilities end up being the front line of defense for urban risk management. And for those of you who have not read the paper yet, I do recommend going back, and a graph that I have copy paste and saved is the one by NASA's GRACE. It's the first graph in the white paper with GWI, showing what was once 100-year events are now regular occurrences, and the sharp rise in intensity of both droughts and floods. And a stat that really stuck out to me was, by 2040, the intensity of extreme wet and dry events could require a 6-fold increase in infrastructure capacity to maintain today's water security levels. So 6-fold in capacity just to maintain today. And when we're thinking about enterprise risk management, and speaking both as how utilities, Kishia, I think, had some really wonderful examples of how they're thinking about enterprise risk management, but we also, as a company at Xylem, we think about enterprise risk management and look at what are those tails of extremes. And those are no longer just tails, but we have to start thinking about worst case possibility in real terms. And so it's really important for institutions, whether enterprises like Xylem, companies using water, but even utilities, on how we really rethink our risk management in ways that are new and extreme. So getting to this graph, I think we just heard from two leaders in urban water management that have really leading enterprise focus, but I think it's really important for us to consider the risk across the US. And I thought this survey done by McKinsey last year was really quite telling. And it differentiates responses across a number of survey questions on resiliency readiness for both small and then large utilities. And you'll see across the board that small utilities, for pretty much all of the questions, have 20% or less answered, yes, we're ready. And I think that's a really important statistic as we think about, or data point, as we think about resiliency readiness, not just for urban areas like New York City, but then when we start to look across the US, where we start to see and really feel the impact of weather-related events in our water infrastructure. But of course, the gap is, as Tallulah laid out very well in the GWI paper. I also was taking from this McKinsey paper last year. On the next slide, Tallulah, what was so well illustrated by both panelists before me is that we do face a funding gap as is, let alone that 6-fold stat that we just talked about in needs for resiliency. But right now, water sector in the US faces a $110 billion annual funding gap, projected to reach $195 billion by 2030. So this implicates that the traditional funding models built for steady use and long-term amortization of assets is not going to work. Funding is not structured to support the significant investments we need to address those tails of extremes, and nor is the funding available. So we have the real challenge ahead of us. So I would like to offer just a few pathways of how we're thinking about it from the Xylem perspective, and then of course want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So I think first, reiterating what the paper well said is resiliency is happening, but we certainly can't lose focus of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That needs to continue to be a focus of all of us across the sector, as water management as a whole accounts for 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. We need to reimagine water funding structures by thinking about resilience not as a cost, but as an investment. And the stat that I really lean on is that for every dollar spent on hazard mitigation or resiliency infrastructure for water utilities, we save $6 to $7 in future costs. And I don't think that statistic is well known enough among general public that this is not just a cost for today, but it really is an investment in the future. And that is a reframing that I think is quite important and values resilience versus the cost of doing something. The alternative revenue models around smart metering and resilience-focused pricing can potentially help the funding gap. It's certainly something we're looking at Xylem, where how we can start to provide some of that technologically enabled financing structure to support utilities to be able to make this a little bit easier, as well as finding ways to accelerate coordinated government support where it is not just a top-down capex investment, but where we can start to integrate different funding sources. And then finally, where Xylem plays a role is in the resiliency first innovation. And I think this is where I believe AI is going to be a significant help in particularly the categories which GWI laid out, the smart and dual purpose solutions, where we can enable predictive maintenance, leak detection, scenario modeling at more cost-effective solutions for utilities to enable. AI can also help us in the assessment of risk and quantifications for the challenges and allowing greater flexibility across our systems. I think the DEP example of capital efficiency that was very stark, and I think sounded like Kishia's points really resonated that or reflected that as well, that how can we use AI in the procurement process, procurement solutions in order to be more efficient with the capital allocation. So I think those are areas where we at Xylem are really excited to continue to explore because we think this can be an enabler for that resilient first innovation. But finally, and move over to questions quickly, the innovation must certainly be paired with institutional renewal. This is not solely the burden of utilities. I think we often say utilities are the first line of defense, which they are, but it is imperative that we, technology providers, our partners in engineering consulting firms, really have a remit and held to account to bring that smart, dual purpose solutions to bear. And that is both on how we can support resiliency with things like AI-enabled tools, bringing those to market faster for utility customers in a way that is also cyber secure and has smart use of cybersecurity across those tools. And finally, the role we all play in education, workforce development in order to take these technological innovations forward. So Tallulah, I'll wrap there so we can get to questions where I'm sure the audience would prefer to be.
That's great. Thank you so much, Austin. And I just wanted to thank you for those final words, because that enables me to plug our second webinar that we'll be having in a couple of weeks, which is going to be on exactly that, on innovation and on how the wider stakeholder and supply chain environment can really support utilities in achieving these goals of resilience. So I hope our panelists can stay on the line for maybe 5-10 minutes more, so we have time for a few questions. So do pop them in the chat if you do have any, but we do have one already come through for Rohit in New York, which is leakage management considered in future capital and/or business strategy and border resilience planning, and if so, how? So yeah, a question on leakage management rather than stormwater.
Um, we certainly do have a renewal plan for our water mains, and one of the things that we have been working towards is an AI-driven prioritization approach. We've actually had some really good results with a first cut at using AI to, on a backward-looking basis, predict the water main breaks that we found, and what that may actually lead us to do is shift funding away from water mains towards other things if we think we can keep an acceptable level. We've had some pretty good years over the last few years with our water main breaks and our leakage, so it's not something that is it's clearly something we always have to pay attention to, but it is not something that we are actively worried about fixing on a remedial basis. Our largest single thing, of course, is a major leak that we've been dealing with, some of you may know, for 25 years in one of our big aqueducts. And that leak is, from a water loss perspective, that's 35 million gallons a day. So that's about 3% of daily consumption citywide. And so that is certainly one that we will be fixing in a couple of years. Unfortunately, last year's drought meant we had to cancel the repair effort for it.
Yeah, because the climate issues always come to the fore, and it's about balancing those long-term strategies and the short-term disasters that happen. I actually have a question for Kishia, as I'm waiting if any have in the chat. And I thought it was really interesting what you were saying at the beginning about obviously having power issues at one of your plants, and I made me think about sort of intersecting resilience, right? So not just about having resilience in your water infrastructure, but also resilience across power and other areas that aren't managed. So I was just wondering if there was a correlation between what you were saying about having a long-term master plan and also getting your other, I guess, infrastructure stakeholders or infrastructure collaborators on board to all be working in the same direction.
Yes, absolutely. And as Austin was reflecting on this last slide, the last bullet resonated with me, that resilience first innovation. And I thought, darn, I didn't touch on our focus on smart one water management, and we too have started to build out a digital twin for our entire water system, and that collaboration is with external stakeholders, including universities that are engaged. And the goal is to make the most of the funding that we have. We want to make sure that we're addressing infrastructure in a way that we're taking care of right now issues, but that the infrastructure will really be fit for future, that we will see long-term resilience and reliability from whatever investments we're making, as we need to make upgrades to the Potomac plant to comply with PFAS regulations. That also presents another opportunity for us to reimagine or rethink how we go about that work and what solutions are in place. And I would also say it's not just the technical solution. I agree wholeheartedly about the need to reimagine water funding and how we get all of this paid for. Because as my first slide indicated, it's no longer sustainable to continue to count on just rate revenue. And so part of our vision outlook that I touched on also includes a section on developing alternative sources of revenue. And part of that will come from us being able to provide services using the resources that we have. We just commissioned a new bioenergy facility in the fall of last year. And we're also looking at other ways that we can provide services with the resources that we have. Energy is one of them, being able to purchase wholesale power. We have the ability in some cases to sell wholesale, not retail, but that provides us an opportunity to again develop alternative sources of revenue. So all with the focus of being able to fund the improvements that we need to make. The other part of the equation for us is being able to invest in our workforce. And I strongly, firmly believe that even as we talk about investing in infrastructure improvements, um, we also can't devalue the importance of maintenance. Having 9 billion in assets, there's no way that we can make all of the investments that we need to make. And so we, but for having a very strong team, very knowledgeable team on Tuesday, I likely would not be sitting in this seat right now, because we had less than 6 hours to find a needle in a haystack. It's easy to figure out issues, resolve issues when you know the cause of it. When you don't know the cause of something with a plan of that scale, it can be very difficult and you're running against the clock. And that really comes from the experience of our workforce. So we're not only looking at how we can invest and develop funding sources to pay for infrastructure improvements, but we have to remain competitive in terms of our compensation and the benefits that we offer so that we can keep the talent.
I'm really glad that we touched on workforce here, because it's very easy in the water sector to get bogged down and talk about capital and infrastructure, and yes, that's important, but obviously everything is underpinned by the workforce. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I think we're going to go for one last question, but we do have a very quick question for someone is curious, what will the repair cost be for such an enormous leak? So if you want to give a quick figure for that, that would be great. But I think our final question for both of you would be, are you exploring the possibility of using AI or digital twins, smart systems to help control greenhouse gas emissions from wastewater treatment plants?
I would say
The
yes
quick
is the
answer.
quick answer.
Oh, yeah. We've actually, I will say, we haven't done AI in terms of GHG emissions. What we did do 2.5 years ago was a comprehensive mapping of all of the fugitive emissions from our 14 wastewater treatment plants, and it yielded a 1,000 point task list. So we are working through it. Some of those were fixable with some plumber's tape, and some of those require a new $100 million set of digester tanks. So it runs the gamut. And the Delaware Aqueduct involved building a bypass to the leaking part of the Delaware Aqueduct that goes under the Hudson River. So that has been a 15-year, $2 billion project.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's not cheap. Not cheap. You're on mute, Tallulah.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Kishia. Yeah, so thank you so much to all our panelists. Yeah, that's what we have time for. I'm not going to impede on anyone else's time. But yeah, thank you so much for those absolutely illuminating points. It was great presentations. And of course, this is all recorded, so if anyone missed a bit of it, we'll be sending that through. But yeah, thanks so much to everyone, and I really appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Rit.
Take care. Good to see
Take
you
care.
all.
Bye, Austin. Thank you. Bye, Tallulah.